Starship flies for a 9th time, reusing a super heavy booster for the first time, but repeating familiar problems of the past. Another Chinese rocket company tests yet another hopper, NASA powers on future Artemis vehicles, and Firefly's next rocket finally gets a name. We'll have all that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. Well, we've got another batch of moon stories this week, and that seems to be a recurring theme lately, as companies and space agencies around the world are focusing more and more on our celestial companion. In fact, we'll even have a lunar landing next week, but more about that later in the episode. First, let's focus on a mission a little further down the road. Teams at NASA are working hard to prepare for the Artemis II mission, the first mission to send humans around the moon since Apollo 17 in 1972. We've been following along as NASA has been stacking the SLS rocket for this mission in the Vehicle Assembly Building at Kennedy Space Center. A few weeks ago, the rocket was completed, and last week, NASA powered it up for the very first time. Now, many things have to come together for this thing to work, and NASA has now verified that all systems are cooperating as designed. Teams in the Launch Control Center confirmed that the rocket and the ground systems are all linked up correctly, and that they can communicate with the systems that control the engines and the booster thrust. NASA plans to perform more of these tests and do some extra work on the core stage throughout the summer. The agency has also released a checklist with the many tests that it's planning to perform before the rocket leaves the VAB for the launch pad. Many of the tests focus on verifying the connections and interfaces between all of the parts, but later in the process, the crew is also set to be involved in a countdown simulation and will enter Orion while the rocket is still in the VAB. Once all of this testing wraps up, SLS will be ready to roll out to the pad for its wet dress rehearsal, during which the rocket will be loaded with propellant and teams will go through a full launch countdown, but without the crew. They'll stop just before T0 though, as of course, they don't want to lift off during the test. NASA really has been busy powering things up because it also recently turned on Orion for the first time. But not the Orion for Artemis II, rather the one after it. Artemis III is the mission set to land humans on the lunar surface again, and its Orion capsule is currently being assembled in the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building. Powering it up is just one key step in the process. During the test, NASA started the capsule's 2 vehicle management systems, as well as 6 so-called power and data units. These are the core systems that control the capsule and everything going on inside of it. Next up, teams will install 70 more components to finish Orion's avionics systems. Among these are all of the screens, controllers, and audio systems that the astronauts will interact with on their journey to the moon and back. When that's all done and tested, teams will move on to the capsule's propellant systems. They expect to integrate Orion with its European service module in 2026. Now, ultimately, NASA wants to establish a more permanent presence on the moon with the Artemis program. This will, of course, be many years into the future, assuming no administration will cancel the project before that happens. As part of this eventual goal, NASA has awarded a few commercial contracts to study how to settle on the lunar surface. This week, Sierra Space announced that they've received one of these contracts. Sierra is working on inflatable habitats for space stations and is now going to study if it's feasible to use this technology to build a moon base. The company wants to use its inflatable habitat to construct tunnels around a lunar station, but will also study other aspects of life on the moon, such as tracking and storage of goods, as well as trash management. NASA contracted Sierra under its Next Space Technologies for Exploration Partnerships program and has also awarded other companies similar contracts to study logistics for establishing a moon base. Among them are Blue Origin, Lockheed Martin, and Intuitive Machines. Let's hope they'll quickly move beyond mere feasibility studies, because wouldn't it be cool to have a job on the moon? I mean, you'd get to commute by rocket. Starship made its 9th flight this week, and while there were a number of successes, this wasn't a fully happy flight. Liftoff took place on May 27th at 23:36 UTC from Launch Pad A at Starbase, Texas, and the vehicles flying on this mission were Booster 14 and Ship 35. This was the second flight of Booster 14, marking the first reuse of a super heavy booster. 14's return to Earth already had a number of milestones and experiments, which is why, for this mission, SpaceX did not attempt a catch. Of the vehicle's 33 Raptor engines, 29 were flight-proven, and at least one of those, Raptor 314, had flown twice before. All 33 engines lit successfully, and Booster 14 flew a clean ascent and reached hot staging. On previous flights, the booster flip after hot staging happened in a random direction, mostly due to small asymmetries from the ship's engine thrust pushing on the booster. For this flight, however, a portion of the hot staging ring was blocked in order for the push to be in a controlled direction, which in this case was meant to be up. And the booster indeed flipped up and then back for a boost back burn that would send it to its landing site in the Gulf. This boost back burn was even better than on this booster's first flight during Starship Flight 7, which saw one engine out. For this mission, the booster was also meant to fly at a higher angle of attack to bleed off more speed before a landing burn. That entry seemed to go well, although the haze made it difficult for both of our cameras to see, as well as for SpaceX's own cameras. The landing burn also involved another experiment, where SpaceX simulated the loss of one of the 3 center engines and used one of the engines from the middle ring for the landing burn. It was right after the engines relit for the landing burn that the booster was lost in an explosion. As of recording, it's not known whether that was due to the high-stress entry or because of an issue during the landing burn. As successful as the booster flight was, it didn't go quite as well for Ship 35. Now, don't get me wrong, there were still successes with this vehicle. Ship 35 lit up all of its Raptor engines at staging and completed its full ascent burn, becoming the first Block 2 ship to reach this milestone. That said, during ascent, there were some weird things going on in the engine bay, but of course, truly anything can look weird if one doesn't know whether it's supposed to happen or not. Well, one thing that's not supposed to happen is the loss of attitude control. Shortly after completing its ascent burn, Ship 35 was seen to enter a slow spin, which then turned into a faster spin. During its coast phase, Ship 35 also had 2 main objectives to carry out: deploy 8 Starlink simulators and perform an in-space relight of a Raptor engine. Ultimately, the Starlink satellite simulators were never deployed because the door couldn't open, and the Raptor relight was also not attempted because of the ship's loss of attitude control. And also because of this, it wasn't in the right orientation for entry, which pretty much meant that it was doomed to burn up in the atmosphere over the Indian Ocean. But wait, am I having deja vu? If you remember from Starship's 3rd flight back in March of 2024, a similar thing happened. Ship 28, the ship from that flight, also lost attitude control and was never able to perform its planned in-space Raptor relight, which also caused it to burn up over the Indian Ocean. The vehicle also had issues with its payload bay door, just like Ship 35 on this 9th flight. Well, this time around, it seems that while the symptoms were the same between flights 9 and 3, the causes were different. During Ship 28's flight, the culprit for its loss of control was traced back to blocked vents that were used as attitude control thrusters. In the case of Ship 35, engineers were able to quickly ascertain that there was a leak in the propellant systems on the vehicle, and that is what caused the loss of attitude control this time. Overall, this flight went much better than Flights 7 and 8, but it's still bittersweet. So close yet so far, right? It finally got a full ascent burn, but none of the in-space tests were carried out, and on top of that, the heat shield wasn't properly tested, so that also may have to be retested on the next flight. As for what's next for Starship, Elon has already suggested that he wants the remaining 3 version 2 ships to fly rather quickly, stating that he wants a launch cadence of 1 every 3 to 4 weeks. At Starbase, teams are already preparing the next vehicles for flight, but we'll have to see whether those timelines will hold. And yes, we are fully aware that Elon's presentation dropped this week as well. We'll discuss that and a whole lot more on the upcoming Starbase update episode, which will also feature the readiness of those upcoming vehicles that I mentioned before. During this photogenic flight, our photographers in the field got some really epic shots, so if you want some of it as art for your wall, don't forget to check out shop.nasaspaceflight.com. Like this print, Full Send to Splashdown by D. Wise, or Fly High Again by Tyler Gray. And of course, you've also still got an opportunity to get our limited edition flight patches, both the official NSF Flight 9 patch and our new Shrug patch, because you know, things don't always go according to plan. Check them out at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. And if you don't want to miss any updates like that, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. And while you're at it, why not like our video? It's free and it tells the algorithm that more people should watch videos just like these. If you're a regular viewer of the show, you know that VAST has been working on its Haven 1 space station. The company's gearing up to launch Haven 1 next year, and if the timeline holds, it'll be the first ever commercial space station. Recently, VAST received some help from NASA in testing some of Haven 1's life support systems. Engineers at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama tested the station's trace contaminant control system, an air filter system used for removing dangerous chemicals from the air inside of Haven 1. These chemicals can be produced by materials on on board the station and even by humans. During the test, the system was enclosed in a sealed chamber, then subjected to a cocktail of chemicals, which it successfully removed as designed. This test is just one of the many that VAST needs to perform to ensure that astronauts can safely live on board the station. But before Haven 1 is ready to fly, VAST wants to launch a smaller demonstration mission. This small satellite will serve as an in-orbit testbed to validate some of the space station's crucial systems, including propulsion, guidance and control, and communications. This week, VAST announced that it has now fully assembled the Haven demo satellite and is subjecting it to vibration tests at the company's headquarters. The satellite is scheduled to launch on a SpaceX rideshare mission later this year. Last year, DOS visited VAST and toured the facilities with CEO Max Haut. You should definitely check it out if you're interested in this company. A somewhat unusual player has now entered the private space station market, the Japanese AI and software company Space Data, which is backed by Yusaku Maezawa. Now, if you remember, Maezawa was the Japanese entrepreneur and billionaire behind the now-canceled Dear Moon mission, but he visited the International Space Station in 2021, so it might not be a huge surprise that he's now involved with a space station project. He also backed Space Data a few years ago as an angel investor. Space Data has been working on digital twins, or high-fidelity digital simulations of our planet and the ISS. The company has also ventured into actual space projects by developing operating systems for space stations and robot astronauts. And this week, Space Data announced that it's now in the business of selling private space stations, but only selling them, as the company doesn't really seem interested in building any hardware themselves, or at least not anytime soon. Instead, it wants to support companies and individuals interested in owning a space station by helping them select a manufacturer, arrange space travel, and even assist with fundraising. What's more, they also want to provide virtual space travel with their digital twins. But is it really space travel if you're not even leaving Earth? Well, according to Space Data, its new business was sparked by, quote, multiple inquiries regarding space stations and space travel. The company has already signed a project agreement with one client, and while they didn't announce who that client is, could it be that Maezawa is looking to go back to space again? Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting with NASA, which has some good news about one of its asteroid probes. The Psyche spacecraft, which is on its way to the metallic asteroid of the same name, 16 Psyche, now has full use of its electric thrusters again after controllers switched to a backup fuel line. Last month, there was a pressure drop in the primary fuel line for pumping xenon to the electric thrusters, which prompted NASA to turn off the propulsion system. But the thrusters needed to be back online by mid-June to prevent any effect on Psyche's trajectory. Thankfully, the spacecraft is equipped with two identical fuel lines, so controllers switched to a backup fuel line. That backup system is now working and the thrusters are back online. A valve in the primary fuel line has a mechanical issue that obstructs the xenon flow to the thrusters, so the valve on the backup line will be open to keep the xenon flowing at all times. Psyche is on course to fly by Mars in May of 2026 for a gravity assist to get it to the asteroid in August of 2029. And now on to a hop test from China. The privately owned startup SpaceX successfully tested its XZY-1 vehicle on May 28th. This demonstration vehicle is a hopper-style rocket designed to simulate propulsive landing techniques, which SpaceX hopes to incorporate into future vehicle designs. This vehicle resembles SpaceX's Grasshopper prototype rocket, which flew in 2012 and tested the propulsive landing systems for Falcon 9 that we know and love today. These exciting tests contributed to the impressive amounts of reuse that Falcon 9 has achieved over the last decade, so it's not surprising that we're seeing other companies try to model the same process. SpaceX monitored 8 key factors during this test. The first was the successful ignition and liftoff of XZY-1 from the Haiyang spaceport, followed by ascent at full thrust. The team also monitored how variable thrust adjustment and engine shutdown impacted the engine. After reaching an apogee of 2.5 kilometers, XZY-1 began a free-fall descent followed by engine reignition, which decelerated the vehicle until it hovered above the water. It then completed all of its planned mission objectives and safely splashed down in the Yellow Sea. SpaceX wants to use the results of this test for a reusable orbital-class rocket, which is set to lift off for its first orbital launch attempt later this year. Space Pioneer, another Chinese company, released new pictures of its Tianlong 3 rocket this week, nearly a year after its infamous static test firing turned impromptu launch. These are the first images of the full Tianlong 3 launch vehicle, and gee, doesn't that look familiar? Yep, it even has 9 engines in the first stage and 1 vacuum engine in the second stage, with both stages powered by kerosene and liquid oxygen. The engine is called the Tianhe-12, and yes, its performance is similar to SpaceX's Merlin engine. Also similar to a certain rocket that we all know and love, Tianlong-3 is designed to carry up to 17 tons to low Earth orbit. What's more, the Tianlong-3 first stage will have landing legs and be partially reusable, just like Falcon 9. Reportedly, the Tianlong-3 rocket was recently shipped to Haiyang in eastern China for static fire tests of its first and second stages. Presumably, Space Pioneer has corrected the cause of its unplanned launch a year ago and will be able to keep this Tianlong-3 safely on the ground until it's actually ready to fly. Astrobotic lost its Zodiac rocket lander after an anomaly occurred during its 176th flight at the test site in Mojave, California. The vehicle detected an anomalous condition while aloft and initiated a flight termination, after which it plummeted to the ground and was lost upon impact with the launch pad. Zodiac was originally developed by Mastin, which was then purchased by Astrobotic. For 10 years, it allowed numerous companies to test flight systems, simulate lunar or planetary landings, and integrate payloads in a controlled environment, thereby validating the performance of their systems before any actual flights. Because of all of these tests, Zodiac became the second most reused rocket ever, successfully completing 175 flights, surpassed only by the company's own Zombie, which holds the record at 227 flights. Astrobotic now wants to develop an upgraded vehicle to fill the gap left by Zodiac. Fortunately, the incident did not result in any casualties or significant damage to the launch site's infrastructure, but the company is investigating the failure to ensure that future vehicles avoid similar issues. Astronomers have recently discovered a weird star or some other kind of celestial object behaving in really unusual ways. It's located 15,000 light-years away in our home galaxy and was first discovered with the Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder radio telescope in Australia. It found that the object's radio signal fluctuates in intensity every 44 minutes, which is thousands of times longer than what astronomers are used to seeing from pulsars, so they're not quite sure what they're looking at here. Then they decided to use NASA's Chandra X-ray telescope and found that its X-ray signal follows the same 44-minute cycle. But it's not just that. Both signals, radio and X-ray, also dipped over a period of 6 months, getting 1,000 times dimmer. These two things combined make it a truly unique object. The astronomers plan to do more research to figure out what's up with this thing, but it just goes to show that there's still so much left to learn about the universe. The European Space Agency has determined that John McFall's leg is fit for space. Earlier this year, ESA certified McFall for long-duration spaceflight, but that was independent of his prosthetic leg. For that, they recently tested the leg in microgravity on parabolic flights. But why does he even need a prosthetic leg in space? Well, astronauts do a lot of exercise to combat bone and muscle loss to keep their bodies strong. Things like running, weightlifting, and biking, all on special zero-G exercise equipment. All of these activities require legs, and for McFall, his prosthesis. His prosthetic leg uses mechanics and electronics to bend the knee, but some of these sensors rely on gravity to work. During the parabolic flights, McFall and his team tested the prosthesis while exercising and fine-tuned its settings to ensure that it's ready for space. Now, if and when McFall will actually fly to space is still unknown. He's currently in ESA's astronaut reserve group, but with him and his leg now determined fit for flight, it's becoming ever more likely that he'll be headed up there one day. Firefly Aerospace finally announced the name for its upcoming medium launch vehicle, which is capable of delivering 16 tons into LEO. From now on, it'll be known as Eclipse. But Firefly isn't working on Eclipse all by itself. The company is collaborating with Northrop Grumman, which is seeking Firefly's help in replacing its Antares rocket. The first stage of Antares was built in Ukraine and powered by Russian engines, so you can probably guess why it's no longer flying. Firefly is now developing a new first stage, which will then be used with Northrop's own solid rocket second stage to form the new Antares 330. The same first stage will also power the Eclipse rocket, which features Firefly's own second stage and a larger payload fairing. This week, Firefly announced that Northrop Grumman has invested $50 million into Firefly for the project and hopes to get Eclipse ready for its first flight next year. Now let's take a look at the space traffic of the week and see what's coming up next week in spaceflight. We kicked off the week with a Starlink launch from Vandenberg on May 23rd at 22:32 UTC. The mission was carrying 27 Starlink V2 mini satellites into low Earth orbit. The first stage for this flight was flying for the 18th time, and it successfully landed on SpaceX's drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. From the other side of the US in Florida, we had another Starlink launch on May 24th at 17:19 UTC, carrying a mixed batch of Starlink V2 Mini and direct-to-cell satellites. The first stage for this mission was flying for its 24th time, and it successfully landed on SpaceX's drone ship, A Short Fall of Gravitas. The Starlink frenzy continued from Vandenberg with a rather quick turnaround and a launch on May 27th at 16:57 UTC. The mission was carrying 24 Starlink V2 Mini satellites into sun-synchronous orbit. This was the first Group 17 Starlink mission and the first batch of Starlink V2 Mini satellites launched into sun-synchronous orbit. This is also the first launch of Starlink satellites to sun-synchronous orbit since the Starlink Group 3-5 mission back in April 2023, although that mission carried the older Starlink V1.5 satellites. These Group 17 missions may be intended to replace and upgrade those older satellites with the newer, more capable V2 Mini satellites. The first stage for this flight was launching for a 13th time, and it successfully landed on SpaceX's drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. The fourth and final Starlink launch of the week happened on May 28th at 13:30 UTC from Florida with a batch of Starlink V2 Mini satellites heading to low Earth orbit. The first stage for this mission was flying for a 19th time, and it successfully landed on SpaceX's drone ship, Just Read the Instructions. And after all of those Starlinks this week, we also had 2 launches from China, with the first one headed to an asteroid. A Changzheng 3BE lifted off on May 28th at 17:31 UTC from Launch Complex 2 at the Xichang Satellite Launch Center in China. The rocket was carrying the Tianwen-2 mission to sample a near-Earth asteroid. In a departure from China's tradition to publicly cover its flagship programs, this launch was not streamed to the public, and no pictures have been released of the spacecraft's integration before launch. There are, however, some bits of public information out there, so it's not a complete secret like some of the other programs in China. For example, we more or less know the flight plan and the timelines for the probe. Tianwen-2 is expected to fly to asteroid 469219 Komo'o-11 and is supposed to enter orbit around it about a year from now. Komo'o-11 is a small near-Earth asteroid orbiting the Sun in an orbit very similar to that of Earth. Tianwen-2 will spend several months orbiting the asteroid, after which it'll sample material from its surface and fly back to Earth. The samples, enclosed in an entry capsule, are expected to arrive on Earth in November of 2027. As for the main spacecraft, it'll perform an avoidance maneuver and fly by Earth, after which it'll head toward Comet 311P Pan-STARRS, arriving there in 2035. Also from China, we had the launch of a Changzheng 4B from the Zhochuan Satellite Launch Center. The rocket was carrying the Shijian-26 satellite into a sun-synchronous orbit. The Shijian satellites are a series of secretive Chinese satellites used to test new technologies and experiments in space. China sometimes reveals the purpose of these, such as Shijian-25, which was an on-orbit refueling satellite mission. And wrapping up the week, we had the launch of a Falcon 9, but this time, no Starlinks on board. After 18 consecutive Starlink launches, this Falcon 9 was carrying a customer payload for the US Space Force, a GPS-3 satellite headed to medium Earth orbit. Specifically, this was the GPS-3 Space Vehicle 8, or SVO-8 for short. Now, this satellite wasn't supposed to launch on Falcon 9. In fact, it was originally intended to fly on ULA's Vulcan rocket. However, delays in getting this certified for military missions forced the US Space Force to quickly change rockets. And this isn't the first time this has happened. The previous GPS-3 satellite, SVO-7, was also supposed to launch on Vulcan, but the US Space Force decided to change it to Falcon 9. At the time, the change was treated as a rapid response mission, literally calling it Rapid Response Trailblazer 1. The launch of GPS-3 SVO-8 follows on the successes of that mission, with the US Space Force only making the rocket change less than 3 months before launch. This was now the 7th launch of a GPS satellite by SpaceX's Falcon 9, which is why, in SpaceX's case, the company called it GPS-37, just in case you weren't confused enough about all those names. The first stage for this mission was a rather young one, flying for just its 4th time. It successfully landed on SpaceX's drone ship A Short Fall of Gravitas about 8 minutes after launch. Going into next week, we'll have a few more Starlink launches, as well as the launch of a New Shepard with 6 people on board from Blue Origin's West Texas launch site. That launch could happen as soon as May 31st, so we'll report back on that in next week's Space Traffic Report. Rocket Lab is also hoping to launch its 7th Electron of the year with the Full Stream Ahead mission from New Zealand. This mission was supposed to have happened by now, but bad weather delayed the launch. And out in space, the iSpace HAKUTO-R lander Resilience is expected to make a lunar landing attempt on the Mare Frigoris region of the moon. That landing is currently planned for June 5th at 1924 UTC, so hopefully by next week's report, we won't also have a new crater on the moon. And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. I'm Alicia Siegel for NSF, and we'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.